are now on item 6, draft minutes. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings at pages 308 to 321 of your meeting pack? Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting of the 11th of September 2025 are a true reflection of proceedings?
Content.
Thank you, members. Item number 7, matters arising. There is no matters arising, so we'll swiftly move on to item number 8, which is a proposal for a regulation as regards European Chemicals Agency, and we're going to have departmental oral advice. And just to inform members that this item will be recorded by Hansard. So can I refer members to the relevant pages at pages 6 to 136 of the meeting pack and pages 3 to 10 of the tabled pack? Members, are part of its consideration of this proposal and the following 2 proposed EU acts, and in order to inform our decision on whether to monitor each of them, the committee agreed to request departmental assessments of impact and invited officials to give oral evidence. An assessment of impact from the Department of Economy can be found at pages 122 of your meeting pack, and an assessment of impact from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs can be found at pages 133 of your meeting pack. In line with agreed processes, departmental officials were provided with questions in advance to be answered as part of the oral evidence session, and the answers can be found at pages 11 of your meeting pack. Officials were also asked to share their responses in writing before the meeting, and they were emailed to yourselves, and a hard copy has also been provided for each of you. And just to remind members that the committee will take a decision on whether to monitor the proposal, and will do so following the evidence session. So can I very much welcome Sarah Jane Murphy, who is the Chemical and Industrial Pollution Policy Branch from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and Mark McGregor, Head of Trade and Windsor Framework Branch, Department for the Economy. So you are very welcome, and just whenever you are settled in and ready, we'll take your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I'm Mark McGregor. I'm going to be leading the evidence today on behalf of the departments. So thank you very much for inviting us to provide information to you this morning on this proposal. DFE has responsibility for 2 of the chemicals regimes covered and can provide comment on a third, while DERA has responsibility for the remaining one and shares responsibility with DFE on another. Proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council on the European Chemicals Agency, amending various regulations, is what we are considering this morning. I will refer to this as the proposal. The proposal will amend the following regulations. Regulation 1907/2006 concerning the registration, evaluation, authorisation and restriction of chemicals, which is more commonly known as REACH, and I will refer to that as REACH throughout. REACH is a cross-cutting area where DERA and DFE share responsibility. Scientific and technical advice in the area is provided by the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain under an agency agreement. The second regulation is Regulation 528/2012 concerning the making available and marketing and use of biocidal products. I'll refer to this as BPR. Biocidal products are a responsibility of the Department for Economy. They are substances or preparations containing active substances designed to control or destroy harmful organisms like bacteria, funguses, pests or algae. I will refer to this as the BPR regulation throughout. The third regulation being amended is Regulation 649/2012 concerning the export and import of hazardous chemicals. I'll refer to this as PIC. PIC is a reserved area. It governs the trade in certain hazardous chemicals that are banned or severely restricted. It places obligations on companies that wish to export these chemicals to non-EU countries or import them. The final regulation being amended is 2019/1021 on persistent organic pollutants. I'll refer to this as POPs. POPs are organic substances that persist in the environment, accumulate in living organisms and pose a risk to our health and the environment. The proposal overall reallocates and consolidates tasks between 4 EU agencies, including European Chemicals Agency, more commonly known as ECHA. These are internal governance matters of the EU and are assessed to have no direct impact on Northern Ireland. The proposal is linked to the EU's One Substance, One Assessment package, which aims to streamline assessments of chemicals across EU legislation. strengthen the knowledge base on chemicals, and ensure early detection and action on emerging chemical risks. As part of this, significant tasks will be reallocated and consolidated between 4 EU agencies, including ECHA, to ensure coherent and transparent safety assessments of chemicals. The regulation makes the following specific changes. It strengthens the capacity of the Committee for Risk Assessment, which is known as RAC, and the Committee for Socio-Economic Analysis, SEAC. It reallocates the Scientific Committee on Consumer Safety from the European Commission to ECHA and clarifies its remit. With this reallocation, SCCS will be a standalone committee of the agency, similar to RAC, SEAC and the Biocidal Products Committee. Contributions to SEAC to the work of the BPC, which is the Biocidal Products Committee, on the assessment of active substances will also be reallocated. There will be an enhancement of cooperation across EU agencies and across different EU chemicals regulations, formalising ad hoc agreements to form part of ECHA's mandate, such as European Observatory for Nanomaterials, EU Chemicals Legislation Finder, and occupational exposure limits. Participation of ECHA in research in the framework of EU research programmes as well. It will also obligate Member States to nominate at least 2 members for RAC and 2 members for SEAC to respond to increased workload and provide representation at Management Board. It increases the sustainability of ECHA's financial model by removing segregation of budgets across different pieces of legislation. It also provides a legal framework to manage the task across different pieces of legislation and ensure consistency, efficiency, transparency of the chemicals assessments across legislation implemented by ECHA. Finally, on those bullet points, it will enhance ECHA's cooperation with other EU agencies to avoid divergent scientific opinions and to foster assessments in line with the one substance, one assessment approach. The proposed regulation aims to update and strengthen the EU system for regulating chemicals, giving ECHA a more central and clearly defined role in the managing of chemical risks and promoting a sustainable chemicals industry. As the regulation is a reorganisation of internal EU institutional and regulatory management structures, there are no anticipated direct effects or implications for Northern Ireland. It is therefore our initial assessment that there will be no significant impact to everyday life or of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. I'll move on to the committee's initial questions. Obviously, some of these were directed at DAERA, and there is a DAERA and a DFE answer. I will indicate which has come from which department. So the first question was, DAERA's assessment of impact states, if the regulation did not apply here, it is unclear if this would have any impact for Northern Ireland's interaction with the affected EU institutions. How do departments and bodies here currently interact with the European Chemicals Agency? So DAERA have advised us, currently DAERA does not directly interact with the European Chemical Agency in relation to this proposed regulation or those amendments stemming from it. DAERA does avail of ECHA databases. We've had a contribution from the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain for DFE, who provide us with scientific and technical advice. We have advised HSE undertakes biocidal products assessment work on behalf of HSE-NI, so our local Health and Safety Executive, through an agency agreement made under the Great Britain Health and Safety at Work Act, and has an agreement with the EU and ECHA negotiated after the UK left the EU on IT access to information, with restrictions on numbers with access, information sharing, etc., in order to fulfil its responsibilities under the agency agreement. You've asked, can we elaborate on the potential implications of not applying the proposed EU Act? The response here from our dear colleagues was, not applying the proposed ECHA regulation in Northern Ireland is unlikely to have negative implications because the proposal focuses on internal EU reorganisation rather than introducing new burdens for Northern Ireland. The regulation aims to make ECHA more efficient, and Northern Ireland should benefit from a more effective EU agency. The final question we received was, can you confirm that businesses in Northern Ireland will be unaffected by these changes? DAERA have contributed, as outlined above, the proposed changes related to the internal governance of EU agencies. These changes aim to improve the consistency of safety assessments, efficiency of underlying technical and scientific work, and consistency of transparency rules. DEAR does not envisage impacts to businesses in Northern Ireland stemming from the proposed regulations. We also had further contribution from the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain. As the proposals are about how ECHA organises internal work, the measures themselves will not have any direct impact on businesses. That concludes our introductory evidence. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. I'll open to the members. No questions for you, Mark, so thank you very much. And you're going to stay, Mark, now for the next presentation. So, based on what we have heard, both legal advice and from the department, can I ask members, do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposal for a regulation on the European Chemicals Agency as it progresses through the EU legislative system?
I think it's prudent to monitor. It may be minimal, but it just means anything can be flagged if anything does change.
Content with that?
Yeah, members content. Okay, thank you. So, based on that decision to monitor, I would like to seek your agreement, members, to request that the Department for Economy and the Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs provide revised assessments of impact if any changes to the text are proposed by the Council of the EU or European Parliament, which would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist, and to ask RAISE to monitor the progress of the proposal and submit quarterly updates to the committee. Thank you, members. Members should note that the Democratic Scrutiny Committee can decide to hold an inquiry at any time into any proposed replacement act that it is monitoring. Okay, so thank you, members. We'll now move on to item number 9 on the agenda, and it's a proposal for a regulation as regards dates of application and transitional provisions. And items 10, we're going to do items 9 and 10 that are on the agenda, and it's oral evidence sessions with of the department officials on the other 2 proposed EU acts, which we have just received legal advice on, and these proposals are part of a package of measures. So if members are content, we're going to do 9 and 10 together, and following this we'll then decide whether to monitor each of the proposed EU acts. And just to inform members that this will also be recorded by Hansard. So can I refer members to pages 137 to 177 of the meeting pack and pages 11 to 17 of the table papers for the proposed regulation on dates of application and transitional provisions at item 9 on the agenda. And can I also refer members to the relevant papers 179 to 307 of the meeting pack and pages 18 to 32 of the tabled papers for the proposed regulation on simplification of certain requirements and procedures for chemical products, and that's item 10 on the agenda. An assessment of impact from the Department of Economy can be found at pages 165 of the meeting pack, and one from the Department of Justice, and it can be found at pages 175 of your meeting pack. An assessment of impact from the Department of Economy, it can be found at pages 274 of the meeting pack, and the one from the Department of Justice can be found at pages 297 of your meeting pack. And we also have one from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and it can be found on pages 301 of your meeting pack. So just to remind members that in line with agreed processes, departmental officials were provided with questions in advance and to be answered as part of the oral evidence. And these questions can be found at pages 184 of the meeting pack. Officials were asked to share their responses in writing before the meeting, and these were emailed to members, and a hard copy has been provided for members. And just to remind members that the committee will take a decision on whether to monitor each proposal, and will do so following the evidence session. Okay, so can I first and foremost welcome Dr. Jennifer Stewart, who is Head of Firearms and Explosives Branch, Department of Justice. You're very welcome. Alan Lunn, Fertiliser Policy, Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. You're very welcome, Alan. And alongside is Mark McGregor. So they're both going to give evidence. So is it over to yourselves? Over to yourself, Mark. So thank you.
Good morning again, Chair. Thank you for inviting us to provide information on the 2 proposals being considered by the committee here. I'll be leading the evidence overall on behalf of DFE, and will provide members with a brief overview before turning to colleagues from the Department of Justice and DERA, and then moving on to your questions. The proposals form part of the 6th Omnibus package, which aims to simplify EU chemicals legislation by decreasing compliance costs and administrative procedures for businesses across the chemical value chain while maintaining a high level of protection. I refer to the proposal for a regulation of the Parliament and Council amending Regulation 2024/2865 as regards dates of application and transitional provisions as the first proposal, and I will refer to the proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and Council amending various regulations as regards simplification of certain requirements and procedures for chemicals products as the second proposal. The first proposal will amend Regulation 2024/2865, which was amending Regulation 1272/2008 on classification, labelling and packaging of substances and mixtures, which is more commonly known as CLP. That amending regulation was subject to an inquiry with your report published on the 19th of December 2024. That amending regulation being amended here amended the main CLP regulation. The CLP regulation imposes requirements on manufacturers, importers, downstream users and distributors to classify and label their chemicals in accordance with an internationally agreed system, the United Nations globally harmonised system of classification and labelling of chemicals, and to package them safely before placing them on the market. The first proposal seeks to defer the application date of measures introduced by Regulation 2024/2865 by 1. Removing the provisions setting time limits for relabelling, advertising, distance sales and measures relating to the labelling of fuel pumps set out in Annex 2 from the list of provisions which will apply from the 1st of July 2026. Secondly, it removes certain provisions from Annex 1 on mandatory formatting requirements from the list of provisions that will apply as of the 1st of January 2027. Deferred application dates will apply for 1. Article 30, a deadline for updating labels following a change in chemical classification or labelling. Secondly, Articles 48 and 48A on hazard communications, rules for advertisements and distance sales offers. Thirdly, Part 5 of Annex 2 on fuel station labelling requirements. And fourth, Article 31.3 and Sections 1.2, 1.4 and 1.2, 1.5 of Annex 1 on mandatory requirements of labels. The proposed amendments are part of a wider simplification package adopted by the European Commission on the 8th of July 2025 to strengthen the competitiveness and modernisation of the EU chemicals sector. It appears unlikely that the application of the proposed Replacement Act would have any significant impact specific to everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. Deferring the application date itself would provide businesses with more time to adapt to the changes. However, the overall effect of the simplification package means these measures will no longer apply, resulting in cost savings for businesses that are regulated under EU CLP. Moving on to the second proposal, it will amend various regulations. Firstly, Regulation 1272 on classification, labelling and packaging, CLP. This regulation falls to the competence of DFE, with DOJ having competence for civil explosives only. It will also amend Regulation 1223/2009 on cosmetic products. I refer to this as CPR. CPR is a reserve matter sitting with DPT, particularly the Office of Product Standards and Safety in the UK Government. However, DFE have been the point of contact with DPT and have brought together their input to today's briefing. Regulation 2019/1009 on the making available of marketing of EU fertilising products and amending various regulations. I refer to this as FPR. FPR falls to our colleagues in DERA. The proposals overall seek to simplify and streamline requirements and procedures of the EU CLP, CPR and FPR in order to reduce compliance costs and administrative burden for the chemicals industry. The proposed amendments in the second proposal are also part of the wider simplification package adopted by the European Commission on the 8th of July 2025. For CLP, it focuses on provisions recently introduced into the EU CLP by the amending Regulation 2024/2865. As I noted, that regulation was subject to your inquiry with the report published on the 19th of December 2024. Regulation 2024-2865 imposed a series of new requirements on suppliers concerning hazard identification and communication in order to provide more comprehensive identification of classification of chemicals hazards, improve hazard making communication by making labels more accessible and understandable, and address legal gaps and ambiguities. It either reverses or further clarifies certain labelling and other hazard communication provisions introduced by Regulation 2024-2865. For the cosmetics products regulation, it seeks to introduce a procedure for requesting the inclusion of substances used as colourants, preservatives and UV filters in the relevant annexes, to provide greater legal clarity and certainty for applicants requesting approval of the use of these substances in cosmetic products. Amendments to the derogation process in Article 15 governing the use of severely hazardous chemicals in cosmetic products, including carcinogenic, mutagenic or toxic for reproduction, so they're CMR substances. It does not appear likely that the application of the proposed replacement EU Acts would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist. The proposals seek to simplify and streamline requirements and procedures in order to reduce compliance costs and administrative burden for the chemicals industry, whilst aiming to ensure the strong protection of human health and the environment. I'll now briefly pass to Jennifer in Justice for some comment before we take some comment from Deirdre and then moving on to your questions. Jennifer.
Thanks, Mark. The Department of Justice has an interest in the classification, labelling and packaging, but as Mark has said, it's solely in respect of explosives for civil uses, and we rely on the Health and Safety Executive in Great Britain for technical support by way of an agency agreement to which DFE are also a party. And as Mark has said, we don't believe that there will be a significant impact in respect of explosives for civil uses.
Thank you, Jennifer. Alan?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I would just like to follow up on the information that Mark has already provided with some comments specific to the amendment to Regulation 2019-1009, the fertilising product regulations for which Deirdre has responsibility. I will refer to this regulation as FPR. So the proposal will amend FPR in several ways, 4 in total. In relation to REACH registration requirements, it will change the assessment of microorganisms in plant biostimulants. It will provide support for digitalisation, and it will amend Article 43 of FPR to remove what is known as the unbundling clause. So if I can just go through each of those in turn. Currently, the extended REACH registration requirement applies to some component materials used in fertiliser manufacture. This requirement places a disproportionate burden on manufacturers because of the compliance costs involved. The proposal will remove this requirement to register substances and instead use general REACH provisions as opposed to extended REACH provisions. The second mechanism, the current mechanism for adding new microorganisms is creating a bottleneck for marketing plant biostimulants in the EU. This proposal will amend FPR to allow the Commission to set safety and agronomic efficiency criteria for microorganisms. It will also set out the methodology for manufacturers and notified bodies to use when assessing compliance with the new criteria. There are several updates proposed to support digitalisation. Certain documents related to conformity assessment and labelling should be in electronic form and accessible through an internet address. Documents and exchanges between economic operators and notified bodies should be in electronic form. Certain reporting obligations change from paper or electronic format to electronic format only. Economic operators to include a digital contact on products which are placed on the market. If a digital label is used, then access should also be provided to the EU Declaration of Conformity. If a product requires a digital product passport, there will be an obligation to provide the information contained in the EU Declaration of Conformity and, if applicable, digital labelling on the digital product passport when the product is subject to other EU legislation that requires the use of such a digital product passport. The committee has previously considered the impact of digitalisation on labelling for fertilisers on 10th of October 2024. These proposals further support that process. The amendment to Article 43 of SPR is a procedural amendment which changes how the EU Commission amends the regulations. FPR classifies products by component material category depending on the constituent materials used to make the fertiliser. Currently, each component material category in FPR must be amended via a separate delegated act. So this proposal will remove this unbundling clause to enable the Commission to adopt delegated acts which amend multiple component material categories at once. This is a technical amendment to simplify and streamline the amendment process. Fertiliser regulations in Northern Ireland are partially harmonised. That means that the EU regulations apply, but also that fertilisers can be marketed under UK regulations. There's therefore dual regulation, and fertiliser manufacturers can choose to market using either the EU or UK regulatory regime. If manufacturers choose to go down the EU route, then it will be these regulations and requirements that will apply. And these amendments aim to simplify that process as well as change the Commission's process for making amendments to the regulations. I would echo what Mark has already said regarding the aims of the proposals in terms of simplifying and streamlining the operation of fertilising product regulations in order to reduce compliance costs and the administrative burden for the fertiliser industry. For FPR, it does not appear likely that the application of the proposed replacement EU Act would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities in Northern Ireland in a way that is liable to persist.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Mark and Jennifer, for your presentations. I'm going to open to the floor, and I have David Brooks,
Thank you very
Vice
much.
Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Peter.
Chair, are you content to move on without the questions being addressed? You had 8 questions.
I think we probably are.
I think we are, because we've received them and we're
Thank
able
you.
to read them. Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being with us today. It's good to see the departments here. And yes, one of my questions probably will refer to one of the questions here. I've sort of scanned through some of the answers. I guess for me, my understanding is, look, in general, this seems to be about simplification. It seems to be taken from yourselves to be essentially a positive. I haven't heard too much in the way of negative in that regard. Our concern, obviously, sometimes is with divergence, and something can be, good for the EU and for smoothing of things from their end, and therefore with ourselves as well, and that can be seen as positive, but also can lead at times to friction. Are you clear then? And I see some of this, to be fair, in terms of the answer to the first question, the BFE response highlights some of the issues where there is already existing divergence, and seems to be saying that it will simplify and make that less harmful as well. Can I take that as read as that is generally the feeling that where there is, and also to say, I think where there is divergence, I think it's noted here that you feel it's less significant because GB duty holders are complying with it on a voluntary basis anyway. And I accept that that's clearly not something that we would see as the optimal situation. We would object to that, but nevertheless, in terms of how things are working at the minute, I've noted that. You don't see anything in these regulations that would bring about any greater friction for any particular product that you're aware of, in terms of divergence and how we interact, particularly with the GB market, or with the GB market interacting with ourselves?
From the perspective of commenting on CLP, so classification, labelling, packaging, and then we took the input on the cosmetics element, because the intention there is broadly or mainly to not introduce measures that were brought in under the previous revision. it prevents those additional layers of divergence from actually coming in.
Right,
If they
yes.
had come in 2026 and 27, there would have been a small additional divergence there. Now, whenever we presented evidence previously on that, we thought that was manageable divergence, but it's actually going to stop those forms of divergence coming in. There will be other areas where elements of the previous revision do proceed, and there will be elements of divergence there where GB businesses have generally been complying voluntarily as duty holders to access the EU and NI market. But for this regulation specifically, it's preventing additional burdens in the main in relation to CLP and cosmetics coming in, so preventing that divergence from initiating.
Thank you very much. Is there any sense in this bill the UK government is likely to move in a similar direction?
It's one where we really don't know at the minute. They've mentioned there within one of the answers the Health and Safety Executive got back to us, they're in the middle of a consultation on chemicals legislation at the minute. They're reviewing the responses for that, and it's very much a watch the space scenario.
We're used to that on the committee, so I do get that, but it's just because obviously in terms of how we consider this in terms of divergence, that can be key as well, but quite often we don't have that information, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Chair. And
Thank you, David. Peter?
It's great. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your evidence today. I just want to talk a wee bit about the UK Government Explanatory Memorandum and just pick up firstly where my colleague left off. And I'll just quote it. It's the EM dated the 26th, I think, of August. We have it as Annex B here. It states that the changes to the CLP regs would mean divergence between GB and NI will be minimised, and that those measures would not impede the movement of chemicals as qualifying NI goods from NI to GB. Forgive me if I missed this on the way through, and maybe I was trying to follow the answer that you gave, Mark, to my colleague David there. I'm just going to ask very specifically about the movement of chemicals from GB to NI, and do you see any issues with what we have before us in terms of that movement? So the EM says it's not going to impede the movement of chemicals as qualifying goods from Northern Ireland to GB. What about GB to Northern Ireland?
In relation to this regulation, the one you're considering today, as opposed to the one it's amending, it will have no impact in relation to that we have been able to identify. That's because it's not bringing in additional burdens in relation to the CLP regulation. So any additional burden or obstacle that was there previously could potentially remain there, but there will be none additional added as a result of the amendment in relation to CLP.
Okay. And I just want to read out something else, which I just maybe couldn't quite get my head around, but give the chance. And it's point 22. It's page 183 of our pack. And it says, DFE and DOJ state that not applying the proposed EU Act would likely have a significant impact because Northern Ireland would seek to comply with measures no longer in effect. DAERA states that non-application is not likely to have a significant impact, but more substantive information requirements would continue to apply regarding chemicals. Is that, in my reading of that, are you taking different positions on basis of what I just read?
I don't think so. I think it's just a slight difference in nuance and presentation, of how we're both setting it. I think one of us has been able to be more forthright than the other has, but I think the assessment is broadly the same. So, yes, I don't believe we're taking a different position. It's just a slightly different nuance. Presentation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? On behalf
Could I just ask, sorry, Chair, on the back of that, if I'm understanding, because obviously if there is difference in terms of how it's presented, I get there's nuance, is that largely because you're looking at different aspects of how it operates, and therefore you're maybe seeing that the aspect that you're responsible for is not likely to be as impacted, where the other departments are saying like there's that might.
There's various factors in play. Obviously, it's they're very separate policy areas, and all of us are taking scientific and expert advice from different UKG partners, and really that information, whenever it comes back to us, and once we've interpreted and understood it, how we present it can end up being slightly different, because you know, the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain may have a different way of assessing it compared to DEFRA. So we're trying to present information that's coming from very disparate sources, so there can be some differences.
No.
Steve,
Yeah, just Mark, thanks very much indeed, and thanks for everybody. As you can imagine, anybody in this committee starts getting nervous when somebody uses the word nuance, and particularly with different approaches between different committees. And one of our jobs is to try and interpret the amount of degree of divergence, or if it's going to have a significant impact. When you use the word nuance, are we talking about a small difference of opinion or a larger difference of opinion? Because nuance isn't a very accurate word to be using when we're talking about regulation, is it?
Well, really the nuance comes in based on the input we have from, you know, our UKG partners, and we have
You're
to
our
reflect.
experts. Mark, you're our experts. Yeah.
You know, but they're the subject matter experts. We assess that, you know, that gives us the basis of our understanding. You know, if the initial basis is presented slightly different, you know, that will stay within the various approaches, because, you know, there's three strands here. There, you know, there's CLP, cosmetics and fertiliser, very, very disparate policy areas sitting across different, you know, departments here and UKG. And a lot of it is done under agency agreement. You know, there isn't a UK government department, leading Department of Work and Pensions outsources this to the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain. So you have those different separate people feeding into us, and you know, we can't take the risk of misrepresenting or inadvertently misadvising a committee. So we present that on the basis of what we receive, and making that exactly, you know, the language across all three consistent is, you know, it was a bit difficult. So we went with reflecting with the information as we received from our partners.
Through the chair, Mark, I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm getting very nervous about the word nuance. And if there is, this is what they say, and that's what they say, I'm quite happy for that to be presented in the difference. I just think it's important that sometimes we're quite careful about how the language is being used here, and it's not a criticism. I know exactly where you sit. I read 900 pages of this guff nearly every week now, and you know, I would love to be able to do it with nuance, but the EU doesn't do nuance. Okay, sorry for that, Chair.
Okay, Peter, is it a different question now, or?
It's just following up on the line, if that's okay, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah. Just again, sticking with that EM of the 26th of August, the evidence that we have here says that UKG states that the practical effects of that divergence would be, and I'll quote here, nullified for GB-based suppliers to NI by other requirements which are due to come into force on the 1st of July 2026. I'm just wondering, do you know what those are? It's an honest question. I don't know what they are, but I'm wondering whether...
That's one I'd have to take away to our Health and Safety Executive colleagues.
That would, if you could come back to us through the chair with that, and my suggestion, Chair, just in when we take action points on this, is we write to UKG and say, what do you think that's going to be? If the committee agrees to that we actually write to UKG and say, well, what are these other requirements that are going to nullify these post the impact of the changes, you know? So okay. Happy enough. But that's all I have for the basis. Yeah.
Obviously, that's kind of two proposals. You've asked the Department of Economy, Mark, to actually follow up, but you're asking that likewise.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair. Maybe I wasn't very clear, but if Mark could come back to us with some stuff from HSE, and then separately, if the committee was willing to write to UKG. Just to ask, you know, what those other requirements that are due to come into force are.
Yeah, it's just if it's HSE GB, we might be kind of asking the same question via two different routes. So,
if you want to direct it through, if you want to direct the question to me, I can engage the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain. We meet with them on a regular basis.
To see if we got the same answer.
That would be quite a test, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be.
I'm now tempted to actually say let's do that, both through it, and see what we get back. But in a more serious vein, I'm not. I don't mind, Chair. It's completely up to your discretion whether we want to ask Mark to do it or whether we as a committee prefer. But it's better as a committee we write.
Look, I don't think there's no harm that both.
Okay.
So
it'd be interesting.
I think all members.
Hopefully, HSE and the government are watching committee, so they get their lines and ducks in order on that one. A little bit of a...
I got a fair bet that that's not going to happen, Peter.
I think...
So just on behalf of the committee, can I thank Jennifer, Mark and Alan for your evidence session this morning. So thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Chair, just a point. Do we have any votes to take by midday?
Yes, we have ones now. Yeah.
But
So
is that the last one?
that'll be the last
Because I'm
ones.
quite conscious I've got a
decisions
drop
or
dead.
any actions after the UFU session and on correspondence would have to be dealt with as
Yeah.
well.
I've got a drop dead time at midday.
Right, that's the only thing with regards to your presentation. If there's any actions from that have to be deferred, they won't have a quorum.
So what you could do, the committee could consider the correspondence now and then just defer any following actions to the following meeting, because there wouldn't be a rush with that. So
Regrettably, it's a
Yeah.
meeting at 12 o'clock. I can't delay.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, just you said there about the UFU presentation, any outcomes of that needing?
If there's any actions, yeah.
I'm just wondering whether, given that those people are have been invited to speak, whether it's more prudent to take that first. I don't know if is there something that.
Yeah, we have a few actions just from the evidence station now, but look, it'll be a few minutes.
Okay, let's
Yeah, okay. Can I just check, Emma, can you hear us all right?
Oh boy.
the UFU actions
Emma.
in the brief are fairly straightforward, so you could just get it now to forward the Hansard. Just if they propose anything further, that would have to wait until the next meeting.
Emma?
Can you hear us, Emma?
I shall return in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Emma is in touch with one of the team and she'll let us know if she needs to leave.
We're here.
So I think it's okay for now that she's confirmed that she's...
She has confirmed that she
Yeah,
is.
she's
all
just
right.
muted.
She's just muted, okay. Well, Steve has just left the room, so
You can take evidence with 4. You just can't take any.
Yes, I think it's best to wait when Steve comes back. Apologies, we have the UFU already here, but it might be good to agree those actions and then you can just press ahead with everything else.
yes.
I will come back, Chair, if that's okay, saying we're just going forward anyway.
Suspend just for a few
Quickly,
minutes, just until.
Members agree.
So members, we're now in public session again, and just following on from our evidence session. Can I advise members now that a decision to monitor should be taken now for each individual proposed EU Act. Therefore, can I ask members, do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposal for a regulation amending regulation EU 2024-2865 as regards dates of application and transitional provisions as it progresses through the EU legislative system?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. Do members wish to monitor the progress of the proposal for a regulation as regards simplification of certain requirements and procedures for chemical products as it progresses through the EU legislative system?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, members. Members, given that we have made that decision to monitor, can I seek agreement that for both COM 2025-526 and COM 2025-531 that the relevant departments provide revised assessments of impact if any changes to the text are proposed by the Council of the EU or European Parliament which would have a significant impact specific to everyday life of communities here in a way that is liable to persist, and for RAIS to be asked to monitor the progress of the proposals and submit quarterly updates to the committee. Agreed?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, members. Members should note that the Democratic Scrutiny Committee can decide to hold an inquiry at any time into any proposed replacement EU Act that it is monitoring. Can I now ask members, with your permission, if we could move to correspondence?
Yeah, happy.
Okay, thank you, members. Item 12.1 at page 482 of the meeting pack is a response from HMRC regarding correspondence from KME Steelworks Limited on EU customs duty. The committee considered the original correspondence at its meeting on the 7th of August and agreed to send it to the Committee for the Economy, the House of Lords, NI Scrutiny Committee and the Secretary of State. Our members content to note the correspondence and to forward it to the Committee for the Economy and KME Steelworks, noting that the Committee for Economy may wish to further liaise with the correspondent.
Chair, if I may interrupt or
Yes.
interject. KME Steelworks is a company not in my constituency, but has been noted for trying to push exports and trying to build the economy. It's basically got a non-answer from HMRC that says follow our procedures and don't look at it. I don't think it's actually helping the company that much. So it's all well and good to outline what all the sort of the issues and what they're supposed to be doing are. But yet again, it doesn't actually seek out to help. When it says, I am sorry to hear about the difficulties it's experienced, I can assure you the government is committing to ensuring the smooth flow of goods within the UK internal market, when the company has very clearly said it isn't. So, I just think we should note the fact that we're relying on HMRC to be able to smooth the operation of the Windsor framework. And here's an example of a company that's been trying to reach out. It's just been basically told, well, it's your problem, not for following the rules and regulations that we can't understand. It just doesn't, I don't feel that they've actually reached out to help that company.
I agree, Chair, and I agree. Even it's obviously a template letter to start with, to some degree, but the even the idea that sort of if they want to discuss their concerns, they can get in touch with us. I think it requires a more proactive approach to that. Whenever you've got businesses in Northern Ireland and it's already been flagged to the UK government that this is an issue, we need more proactive engagement. They know there's an issue. Why are they not contacting KME Steelworks to offer their assistance in that regard? I agree with Steve in that regard.
So, Chair, maybe I have a suggestion here. We're getting lots of, particularly in the constituency position, we're getting lots of companies are complaining about the delays in getting reimbursement from HMRC. That's now sort of well beyond 6 months for some people. I wonder if it would be in order for the committee to ask HMRC and come and talk to us and tell us what they are doing to help facilitate this, because that's part and parcel of our role. And I would suggest that we write to HMRC and invite them to come here before this committee and explain how they're helping to facilitate the Windsor framework. Because this doesn't seem to be facilitating to me. But that's only a proposal, and somebody else can second it.
In the first instance, would it be appropriate that we request the Department for Economy to follow up with HMRC in relation to the concerns raised, not only by the company, but likewise members of the committee in the first instance? And on the back of that, it may be then appropriate to invite them.
Sorry, through the chair, and
Yeah.
my concern is that because regrettably we're stuck in this committee, we tend to get the focus of a lot of our constituents across all of Northern Ireland. HMRC has now been seen as a major problem. I think actually HMRC coming early, because they'll get the Department of Economy get the same answer from HMRC. What I think would be important is HMRC come and explain to this committee what they're trying to do to make the thing work.
If I could maybe come in briefly. So the Committee for the Economy received that correspondence previously, and they're going to take up those issues. So they've got a couple of evidence sessions scheduled, and I think we're going to consider the correspondence from KME Steelworks as well. So just in terms of the divide between looking at proposed and published replacement EU acts that are notified here and those much broader current issues, the Committee for the Economy is looking into various things. So this committee might wish to write to them and include some of the points that have been made on that in the first instance to avoid any overlap.
I sort of came through the chair. My concern is that there is one point of here that is affecting the smooth and efficient running of the Windsor framework. And remember Lord Murphy's report of how it was going about understanding and knowledge. I still think that HMRC should come and explain to us how they're trying to make it work. Because I think this, and we've got represented here from the Ulster Farmers Union, and as well as I do, again through the chair, the issues we're having with HMRC on lots of issues, because I get lots of it from sort of the agribusiness sector as well. So it's a proposal. It's if somebody seconds it, we can put it to the vote or whatever it happens to be. But that's where we are.
Chair, I'm happy to second it. Look, I think it's quite poor. Nearly looks like a template letter. to be quite honest. And if I was, I think the guy's called Jason, is that right? From KME, I'd be really frustrated if I got that. Now I appreciate that the officials are saying, they're happy to contact the team and so forth. But my view would be, we get them on and we say, what has the contact been and how are you resolving these problems? Because whilst KME is one business in, I'm not even sure, is it in Lambert, is it in Lisburn somewhere?
Yeah, Lisburn,
There are, as Stephen rightly said there, it's a wider issue for Northern Ireland. There are lots of KME steelworks, and these are serious problems for these businesses, and we rely on these businesses to drive our economy forward. So I'm quite happy to second Steve's proposal. We do ask for direct engagement. Happy to continue with.
Could I just maybe perhaps make a suggestion? I'm just conscious that the UFU is here for the evidence session, so could we maybe have this discussion perhaps at a later date, because it also relates to consideration of reserved matters, and there are a number of responses already outstanding. The committee's requested the UK government that their officials would attend, and we're still waiting a response for that, so it might be preempting things a bit. So maybe at the next meeting the committee could consider it kind of in the round, and there might be a few responses. We've been told that they are being pushed, might get them in the next few weeks.
I don't see why we can't walk and chew gum. I don't think there's an issue with asking HMRC officials to attend today and getting that
Getting a response.
I'm getting a response for the next meeting. I don't see if we'll see how interested they are in terms of when they come back, and we can consider that all in the round at the next meeting. But I don't think there's any issue in passing. I'm supportive in terms of my colleague seconded it. Steve proposed it. I'm happy to support that.
Okay, members, just based on what we have heard, we will write to HMRC and then invite them to the committee. And I do understand, obviously, there's outstanding information because there's other concerns they may raise. So you would ideally want to receive as much information prior to them presenting. But there is no harm in having those initial conversations and concerns.
They may come back and say they're already coming to speak to Committee for the Economy. On those issues or whatever. But I certainly don't know at this stage whether the Committee for Economy have made that invitation or whether this specific aspect has been dealt with. So I think it's appropriate. We can ask and we can, and if they, we'll see what the response is in that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, members. So item 12.2 and 12.3 are status updates from RAISE. Okay, members. 12.2 at pages 488 of the meeting pack is an update on a proposed regulation on end-of-life vehicles. The committee is currently gathering evidence on this proposal. And item 12.3 at page 47 of our table papers is an update on a proposed regulation regarding certain market rules and sectoral support measures in the wine sector and for aromatised wine products. The committee was notified of the proposal and is currently monitoring it. Our members content to note both updates and to publish them on the relevant committee web pages. Okay, thank you, members.
Sorry, can I just go back to the KME? I just want to check that the committee are happy, as well as writing to HMRC, to forward it to the Economy Committee and let KME Steelworks know that response was received.
And notify them that we are inviting HMRC officials to attend committee.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are now going to move on to item number. Wait, I just double check here. Number 11, members, and that's a proposal for a regulation on the protection of animals during transport and related operations. We are pleased that we will be taking oral evidence from the Ulster Farmers Union. This item will be recorded by Hansard and can remind members that this proposal has not been notified to the committee. It was proposed before the committee was established, and we agreed to gather evidence on it in anticipation of a likely notification once published. At the meeting on the 15th of May, the committee agreed to invite the Ulster Farmers Union to give oral evidence on this proposed EU Act, and we also received legal advice and heard departmental evidence on the proposal, and we also held a citizen space survey. Can I advise members that the European Parliament and the Council of EU have not yet established their positions on the proposal. This will need to take place before trilogues begin. The relevant committees in the European Parliament are expected to vote on a draft report on the proposal at the start of October. A number of amendments have been proposed. Can I now refer members to the relevant papers at pages 3262 to 480 of the meeting pack, which indicates that the evidence gathered to date. Suggested questions can be found at pages 332. Written evidence from the Ulster Farmers Union can be found at pages 33 to 45 of your table pack, and this includes the British Agriculture Bureau's assessment of the proposal and a submission on the economic impact of the proposal on the pig sector. And just before I invite Kate and Alexander to present their evidence, and you are very welcome on behalf of all committee, I've just a few actions, members. Could we just, I'm conscious just with regard to a quorum. Are members content that a copy of the Hansard of this evidence session, once available, is forwarded to the British Government and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, and indeed also the written evidence that has been provided? Yes, thank you, members. Are members content to ask the British Government and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to consider and comment on the evidence as part of their assessment of the published EU Act?
Great.
Okay, thank you. So,
I just
yes,
need to
Steve?
make a declaration of interest. Obviously, Alexander and I have sort of worked quite closely together on various things through the Ulster Farmers Union and through our office and deals with the Windsor framework. I just want to put that out as a declaration of interest there that we've been in communication.
Thank you, Steve. You're very welcome, Kate and Alexander, and just whenever you're ready, and I apologise for the delay in the schedule. It was just a lot of business to get through, and we wanted to ensure there was a quorum, so thank you.
Okay, good morning committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important subject. I'm here today representing farmers from Northern Ireland, and I'm joined by Kate Allams, Senior European Policy Advisor from the British Agricultural Bureau. The BAB office has represented farmers and growers across all 4 UK farming unions in Brussels since 1972. Following restructuring after Brexit, we continue to hold membership of Copa Cogeca, which unites the voices of 22 million European farmers to promote the interests of agriculture within EU institutions. We appreciate the scrutiny of EU laws and their implications for Northern Ireland, both positive and negative, while recognising the scope within which this committee must operate. Our concerns are outlined in 2 documents already submitted to the committee. These highlight several issues, including the scope of the legislation, supervision of loading and unloading by a veterinarian, journey times and feeding requirements, temperature limits during transport, development of the mobile application, fitness for travel, minimal vertical height, space allowances during transport, enforcement of the legislation, and crucially the overall cost to the industry. It goes without saying that farmers in Northern Ireland are fully committed to maintaining the highest standards of animal welfare. Ensuring that livestock and poultry are transported humanely is of utmost importance to our members. Our concern is not with the principle of stronger welfare protections, but with the practicality of legislation that must be proportionate and feasible. Otherwise, there is a risk of undermining both welfare standards and the viability of farm businesses. We are also concerned that to date, too much of the responsibility for representing these interests in Brussels has fallen to the Ulster Farmers Union and BAB. While we will continue to collaborate with partners on issues that affect the entire island of Ireland, government must accept its own responsibility and not step back during what are seen as temporary circumstances. There is an urgent need for more coordinated and sustained lobbying from both London and DAERA in Belfast to ensure the best possible outcome for farmers in Northern Ireland. Finally, access to the single market remains absolutely critical for our sector, and safeguarding that element of the Windsor framework is essential. However, there is a clear democratic deficit under the existing arrangements. Our consistent position has been to advocate for a comprehensive UK-EU sanitary and phytosanitary SPS veterinary agreement. While such an agreement would not resolve every issue, it would go a long way towards delivering a fair and more sustainable outcome for Northern Ireland. We are happy to answer questions from members. Kate will address technical details and I will be pleased to respond to broader queries.
I'm going to just open it to the floor if you are content. Yes, so Steve, thank you.
Just a quick one. Alexander, thanks very much indeed, and sort of welcome Kate, and sort of apologies for running late, but this was Alexander and team. Look, we've heard a lot about the SBS and what the SBS is going to do and what it's not going to do, but we've also heard, I must admit, I know the declaration of interest. I do listen to Farming Today every morning. And we did listen to the government minister saying that the SBS isn't going to even be discussed until 2027 and any implications to 28. And our concerns is that divergence is beginning to increase. Could you just outline, bearing in mind we're not going to see anything done soon, what amount of divergence are we going to see when these regulations come in, and what's the impact going to be, particularly in the Northern Ireland agribusiness sector?
Well, I think first of all, you hit the nail on the head around timescales. Whilst the agreement will be welcomed and hopefully at some point we get there, there's no guarantee that we will. And hence, really, in a sense, nothing will change for Northern Ireland when that agreement happens. What will change is that GB will join us in sharing a lot of problems that we have experienced. And the key point around this is around the democratic deficit, which we've explained and we can go into in further detail later. Kate can come on to the technical detail about what's happening in GB, but this will cause divergence, and I suppose the summary of what we want to get out of today is to explain to members that we need to be better represented in Brussels regarding what this is going to mean. It doesn't all have to be negative, and as an organisation and organisations, we've been very clear to say that so-called Brexit issues like veterinary medicines, used agriculture and machinery, all of that is very much separate to future EU law. We have to trade in the single market, particularly for our sheep sector and dairy sector, hence we're going to have to abide by the rules that market sets. But that doesn't mean that we can't mitigate, seek derogations, etc. And Kate, do you want to maybe explain just where GB is at, I suppose, in terms of their current legislation?
Yep, absolutely. So as has already been correctly mentioned, with the future SPS agreement, we fully expect that this legislation will be in scope of that agreement. So we will end up most likely in a situation in a few years' time, wherever that may be, that we will all be aligned with the rules and legislation. However, currently GB isn't looking at amending its animal welfare during transport legislation, so there could be divergence that exists as and when the EU moves forward. You mentioned earlier that the discussions are still ongoing with the Parliament and the Council. Things are a little bit delayed with both of those institutions. As you can imagine, the discussions can be quite divisive, quite controversial in some instances, but we still could end up in a situation where we do see that divergence between the EU and Northern Ireland and of course GB as well.
Could I ask this supplementary, Chair? Looking at sort of your submissions and the rest of it, and also I've spent a lot of time talking to vets here in Northern Ireland. So the requirements within the EU's about veterinary checks and loading, particularly sort of pigs and all the rest of it. We don't have enough vets. We're well short of vets as we have at the moment. We're about to, or we have already introduced sort of border posts in Larne and the rest of it that require vets, and they don't have enough vets for that. So what's your particular view about where we're going to get the vets to apply those standards from? And if we can't get the vets, is there any chance of getting do you think the EU would give us a derogation? I probably already know the answer like that, like anybody else does, but I just want to put it on the record, please.
I'll take this one, that's okay, Alexander. Perfect.
Yeah.
So this has been a key issue for us. I would say probably our number one concern with the European Commission's proposals. As you've quite rightly referred to already, there isn't the required number of vets in Northern Ireland or in the rest of Europe either. So we just don't actually have the people there to do this job. Separately to that, obviously, this requirement would come at a significant cost to the industry. So as UFU, they participated in an impact assessment by IFIP, who are a French research institute for pigs. And they outlined that the average cost for a veterinary visit would be £155. Now, this was probably assessed about a year ago, so we can imagine that that cost has probably increased already, and the cost is only going to increase over the next few years as well. And just specifically for the pig sector, they expect the cost of that to be about £2.5 million. And you can imagine that if you consider the cost for the other species and other sectors, poultry, dairy, bovine, sheep, that's going to become a huge cost to the Northern Irish industry. Separately to that again, we also don't believe that vets are required to even do the supervision of the loading and unloading. We've already mentioned that in Northern Ireland you uphold incredibly high animal welfare standards. The mortality rates during transport are incredibly low in the country, so 0.02% for the pig sector. That is actually lower than the EU average, which is 0.25%. So you already have incredibly high standards, and from our perspective, the vets just aren't required to do this job because farmers, hauliers, transports are already doing it incredibly well themselves. In addition to that as well, we would also have concerns that if this requirement comes in, it could actually negatively impact welfare as well, because if you imagine you have a vet that's having to supervise the loading of animals in the north of the island and then having to travel to a different part, if there's any delays, stuck in traffic, things like that, it would then delay the vets getting to their second location, which would mean it would take longer to actually transport those animals as well. So we do have huge concerns. With regards to a derogation, I think you kind of alluded to the answer yourself. If this requirement does come in the EU, I would be very, very surprised if we could secure any kind of derogation. Okay. Notwithstanding that, obviously, we mentioned as well that the discussions are ongoing in the Parliament and the Council. There have been several amendments that have been put forward by the Parliament to try and remove this requirement, but with all of these things, you never quite know what's going to be in the final agreement until the end of the trilogue negotiations, and that is why it's so important to make sure that we are putting across the views of Northern Ireland to try and influence the procedures where possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yep.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask you to sort of paint the picture, probably to some degree you've just painted, in terms of what the impact of that divergence would be both on the industry but on the individual farmer. If you have anything more to say to that, by all means, I think it'd be helpful for the record. But I'll ask my second question then was going to be that this committee has on a number of occasions raised the issue of needing a greater resource channel towards both the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels and London, also to make engagement with these issues more than a desktop exercise in London. Mm-hmm. So I think we'd be supportive of that. Can I ask, from your perspective, what in an optimal situation you would say that engagement should look like in Brussels relative to what there is currently? What do you think that both we should be doing from an executive, understanding that we have resource issues at large in the executive and other priorities that we need to look at too, and all of that. But what should we be aspiring to in that regard, and what then should be expected of Whitehall?
I think 2 points, just to follow on from Kate. I think the bureaucratic pressures this entirely places on farmers as well has to be taken into account. We're seeing this across a whole various pieces of legislation, and the Assembly's very good at debating a lot of this stuff that does add pressure to farmers, and we're always keen to point that out. As well as that, the cost of this, somebody has to pay for it. So it's either going to be the farmer paying for it, or it's ultimately going to be the consumer paying far more. And we can already see where food inflation is heading and is going to go towards. I think the second point around engagement and resources is critical, and we note what Lord Murphy said in his report, who has ultimately said what the business community has been saying for 2 years now. The engagement around this issue has not been what we want, to be very honest. I suppose, as we said, the BAB office restructured post-Brexit. We maintained that office as part of 4 unions, and that comes at significant cost to our members. But it is pretty clear that responsibility, and particularly within DAERA, I think there's an onus there for them to take forward an impact assessment. They admitted that in the evidence to this committee that hasn't happened. That should be done. We note that Minister Muir has made quite a thing of welfare and making that part of his theme as minister until such times as the Assembly finishes. It doesn't mention this piece of legislation, and I think whenever farmers come forward with concerns around welfare, we're often given a cold shoulder, whilst the focus is always maybe particularly on smaller animals and stuff, and not that it shouldn't be, but welfare of course goes right across the piece. The Executive Office clearly needs better resourced, and it needs the skills and expertise to basically match what we are doing. So if you like, our model is to consult with the grassroots members in Northern Ireland. We discuss it with our committees, it goes to our executive, we formulate a position. We then work with BAB, who are acting as the main force over in Brussels, gathering information. And I think not only in this piece of legislation but others, it's government coming to us looking information, and whether that be in London or Belfast, it should not be that way round in a sense. And I suppose whenever we go forward to the Commission to put forward a case for Northern Ireland, they are then going back to our governments to ask, is what we are putting forward accurate and is it correct? And of course, DERA and co are unable to prove either way. So it needs staff that understands the intricacies of what is going to happen. And I think the excuse we heard a couple of years ago was that the Windsor framework was being discussed and then agreed to. The next excuse was that it was being implemented. And the third excuse we're hearing is now that we're waiting on an SPS vet agreement. But as we all know, that day may not come. Hopefully it will. But for Northern Ireland, we are going to be governed by these EU laws, and for obvious benefit. But we have to get Northern Ireland's case made because the rest of the member states are making it. We always hear as well from government officials that it's too early. The legislation hasn't been agreed yet. This is the time to lobby in Brussels, and anybody that has been to Brussels will understand that.
Thank you very much. It's very helpful for me. I have worked in Brussels for a number of years. I understand that you need that active lobbying. I'm not a member for East Belfast, so unlike Steve, I do not listen to Farming Today. I'm not even sure I know where to find it. I'm not sure I know where to find it. So that's useful information for me, and I'm sure to anyone listening in that regard. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you both for coming in today. Nearly not sure if I should declare an interest, as my father-in-law is a hobby farmer in Fermanagh who won't be watching this, but he did explain the difference between a cow and a heifer for me whenever I was dating his daughter. I'll maybe start off where colleagues have finished, particularly Alexander with you, and you mentioned some engagement with with DERA. How helpful have DERA been on this particular issue, and how would you characterise the level of engagement and support that you've received from DERA?
Well, I think I read with fascination the transcript about the engagement and the levels to which we had been engaged, and there was quite a good summary of what we had done. I think the question I would point back is to ask what DERA have done to date regarding this issue. Now, I think the office in Brussels, and I make that distinction because it's the executive office, they are trying their best amidst difficult circumstances, and there's no doubt about that. However, they can only do so much with the people they have. But I think when you take a step back and look at DERA specifically, this topic isn't being covered, and it's not only this one, but various pieces of future EU law. There's not a forensic analysis being done. We understand the pressures in Belfast around staffing, resources, trying to get people with the specific detail, but there's going to have to be a better collaboration because what is going to happen is this legislation is going to happen regardless. There's no doubt about that. There's no point sitting debating that fact. So it's trying to get the best case forward, but it has been disappointing, I suppose, is the best way to put it diplomatically.
Yeah. If I could just add to that as well, and just to Alexander's comments, is we haven't had an impact assessment of what this will look like for Northern Ireland, and I think for us that's been a bit of a disappointment, really, and it was disappointing.
Why is it? Can I ask why that is? Sorry, I interrupted you. Never do that before a witness. But can I ask why that is? That's a DERA impact assessment, is that right?
Yeah, so I assume probably resourcing issues and staffing issues as well, and just not having the time to actually do that. We were very fortunate in the fact that we are still members of Copa Cogeca, and they decided to work with this French research institute to do one specifically on pigs. And after a bit of negotiation, we managed to convince them to allow Northern Ireland to be a part of that impact assessment. And that's shown that the economic cost just for the pig sector would be within the region of around £4 million. But I think realistically we think that probably is quite a significant underestimate. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, we haven't had the same opportunity to do that for the other sectors. We've not looked at poultry, sheep, bovines, etc. But if you can imagine that there's millions of pounds of impact just for one sector, you can imagine what the cost would be to consider all of those. So yeah, I think we're very fortunate in the fact that we do still have a good relationship with these people who can sort of help us try and work out what these implications and impacts will be. But yeah, I think just to echo Alexander's point, I think more could be done.
So you referenced Kate on the way through there, chickens, and the fact that that impact assessment has been done in one specific area with the help of an external organisation. I mean, I came across, and it's actually funny because my colleague Steve there had the table up, and it was one of the most interesting things that we've seen today, the table on sales. I mean, just if I'm right, the figures I got, we sell 750,000 chickens a year, and we buy 12 million. I mean, the impact of legislation around this must be simply huge. And I've written down here, we buy lots of pigs from the Republic of Ireland, and interestingly, not many from EU or GB. I think, again, this is not my area, I'm not an expert around here, but those are startling figures, and surely when those start to add up, and you look at what the impact, the financial impact is to Northern Ireland, whether that is farmers who are rearing livestock and then selling them on, and then you have this piece of legislation which undoubtedly is going to impact on the cost of doing that, of that process. And then, Alexander, as you pointed out there, who's going to pay for that? You know, is it going to be the farmer pay for it, or is it going to be the consumer pay for it? So the industry itself is a massive contributor. I was going to ask, and you may not have the question, roughly what is the financial benefit? That's not the word I was looking for, but how much economic impact does these sales? I mean, we looked at cattle, pigs, chickens, sheep. I mean, just in broad brush numbers, how much does that contribute to the Northern Ireland economy?
Well, roughly I say, and it's quite a big question which would require a big answer. We're exporting about 80% of what we produce, and we are an exporting nation, and we're always very clear about that if we want to trade in other markets, we're going to have to comply with their rules. But you're right to forensically focus on those figures, and I suppose they will fluctuate year on year depending on the prices of markets. The blue tongue sort of episode in Europe and stuff has impacted as well, and the lack of sheep in Europe and the demand for our sheep and different things. So that will change, but the important thing is trying to keep markets open and keep them, restrictions on a minimum. But it has been disappointing. But again, I think if you speak to any business community on a topic to do with future EU law, they will say the government as a whole have been very slack on their uptake in terms of working in Brussels actively. So I think, we're in the middle of the new normal. We're not at the beginning of it. We knew this was going to happen 4 years ago, and hence people really need to pull up their socks, if you like, and get on with where we are, because if we don't, we're going to be at a worse position in 2 years' time and further on down the road. And as well as that, there's a great responsibility in us, and of course we're going to represent our members to the best of our ability, but we can't do the government's work for them, and we're very clear about that.
I'm sure.
Peter, sorry for interrupting.
Okay,
Steve
Chair.
has to leave now, and he just wanted to make a proposal just before he leaves.
No, it was. I wanted to make a proposal before Steve leaves.
Before Steve leaves, right? Okay,
if that's okay, Chair. I just think, looking particularly at Lord Murphy's review of the Windsor framework, and what he has recommended, I think we should write to the Executive Office to see how they're looking at and engaging with the UK government in particular around a bolstering of our resources in Brussels to deal with these issues, how individual departments as well are looking at maybe stationing people in the Brussels office to assist with this. And I also think we should write to the Cabinet Office, particularly in light of the recommendations of Lord Murphy's report, to ask how they are going to address that, particularly given these are reserved matters. Whilst the Executive Office in Brussels carries out some of that work on behalf of the Executive, the ultimate responsibility for representing Northern Ireland as part of the UK in Brussels lies with the UK government. So how are they going to ensure that this place is resourced in order to carry out those issues, and how is Whitehall going to support their own work and ensure that their own work feeds into the work that this committee is dealing with, including the issues raised today by the UFU. So that would be my proposal, that we write to the Executive Office and the Cabinet Office on that basis.
I think it is quite pertinent, and I know it's been something that's continually been raised, and as you say, it has been well up there in the Lord Murphy report. I suppose it's early days, there hasn't been, the government's going to take 6 months deliberations, but that shouldn't stop us for ensuring how important it is, how paramount it is, and what steps are currently being taken.
And these are issues that are live here now. They can they can consider the Lord Murphy report in the round as they wish, but I think we're alive to these issues and they should be too.
Yeah, so I think it would be really, really useful to see
Yeah.
what is currently being looked at, who's looking at it. So
I would, Sir Chair, I'd be content to second that.
Yeah.
Just sort of one very quick observation. I apologise, Alexander, and apologise. I had a hard stop 10 minutes ago, but I really wanted to hear your evidence. The issue about SPS and about, we've heard from the people who are going to be most affected to it, and SPS, the delays in it, what's taking. And bearing in mind Lord Murphy's report saying about greater coordination and linking and sort of outreach and partnership.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything from the Northern Ireland how we're being outreached to be able to deal with the SPS issue.
Well, I think to be fair, officials are planning better engagement, and they have said they have want to enact the process better than the Windsor framework, which is good. But I suppose this is one last chance to get this nailed down and right. And as I say, we can't afford to miss that, and no business can afford to miss that.
Thank you very much today, and I apologise for sorry me going.
And while Steve is still in the room for the last 20 seconds, in order to get a further.
William Crawley's going to be really upset with you.
He is. No, blame me. I would propose we write to DAERA and ask them why they haven't conducted these impact assessments, given the extraordinary impact that these proposals are going to have on the economy in Northern Ireland,
Great.
both in how we sell to GB, but in these figures, also how we sell to the Republic of Ireland and what we buy from them. And the figures are really startling. I am shocked that it's taken these folk to actually engage a third sector organisation in France to get one sector of this done, and actually we're buying and selling millions of chickens every year, and DAERA haven't actually attached the resources to look at what the impact of this legislation is going to be in the future if it comes through. So I think we write to the DAERA, ask for their reasons for not having done it, and then ask them when are they going to do it.
Agreed.
agreed, that's fine.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
And my apologies to William Crawley, it's another member of the media. Sorry.
Thank you. Peter, have you any other questions you want to
Yeah,
ask? I know
yeah.
I cut you short, so I apologise.
It's okay.
For that.
So as
Yeah.
long as we've got those done, then we
Yeah.
can keep talking, even though there's only 4 of us left in the room. 2 of us left in the room. 3 of us left in the room. On the way through there, you mentioned better representation in Brussels. And again, forgive me, maybe I just a lack of understanding on my part. We do have a fellow in Brussels who represents Northern Ireland. I don't know.
Aidan Connolly.
Aidan
is
Connolly.
the-
Is there much? Do you have much interaction with Aidan in terms of raising these issues? Do you feel, for example, that something, bolstering up, the second Aidan would be useful, or what in terms of getting used? I think it was Alexander used the phrase "better represented in Brussels." I mean, what does that look like to an observer? Or Kate is looking forward to answering perhaps there. I don't know.
Absolutely. I think as UFU and as BAB, we enjoy a really good relationship with the Northern Ireland Irish Executive Office, and they are a very small team that cover a very wide breadth of topics. And I think with all of these organisations and government bodies, they can always do with some more resource to try and cover more issues. I think from our side, what we would really like to see is probably just some more resources dedicated into those offices. As I say, we do have a very good relationship with them. So every second month, Alexander and UFU President William Irvine come across to Brussels for the Copa Jacob Stadium, which we don't need to go into the details of. But we always do try and meet with Aidan and the team there. But I think whenever we do meet them, it is just quite apparent that they just don't have the people there needed to sort of look at this in the detail it is needed to. But I'll let Alexander come in with more
No, I think
specifics.
Kate summarised that well, and that's very much an open secret. But I think whenever you reflect back home that we're here representing an industry worth 8 billion, that's not reflected in the personnel to cover these issues. We understand the difficulties around Brexit, the Windsor framework, its rollout, and the ever-changing picture. But there needs to be people there now getting a hold of this situation, because it's this today, it'll be something else. We have weekly problems regarding a number of issues on this front, but as Kate says, it needs the people and it needs the resources, and it also needs to be able to have the authority to work across government, to liaise with the Cabinet Office, liaise with the Executive Office, and be able to get the information whenever they need it. And I think we have proven it can be done, albeit we could do things a lot better, but we also have our own resource pressures, and we're covering a number of fronts. But there has to be greater focus on this industry, bearing in mind how important it is to our economy here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry, if I could just come back on that as well. I could probably talk about this all day, and appreciate we don't have all day to discuss.
You keep talking
this,
about all day, there'll be nobody left.
I noted in one of the questions that you'd sent across as well was sort of questioning the engagement that we have with, for example, the Irish Ministry and also the IFA. Mm-hmm. So again, that is something that as UFU and as BAB, we have really tried to prioritise to try and work out where we do have these shared challenges. But I think it's also important to note that whilst there's a lot of value in those relationships, quite often our priorities might differ a little bit. So one of the huge concerns for the Irish sector with this proposal is the impact on the export of calves into Europe for the veal trade, which is obviously an issue for some producers in Northern Ireland, but maybe not quite to the same scale as in Ireland. So they've put a lot of their political capital, negotiating capital in to try and sort of amend those rules. Whereas for us, we would be looking at potentially some other priority areas, for example, space allowances, journey times, temperatures, etc. So I think that's just another reason why it is so important that we have these people representing the Northern Irish industry to really highlight what the concerns are. Okay.
Final question really is, I know that there's probably a few action points that we've already noted and we will take forward. And is there anything else this committee can do given what you've outlined today? Are there any specific things that you feel the committee could take on with regard to this issue?
Well, I think I make a broad point on that. I think keep scrutinising is the advice. There is a democratic deficit on this matter of future EU law, and I stress the other Brexit issues are separate and they're distinct, and they are very much up to the Cabinet Office to work with others, and to be fair to them, they are. But on this issue and others, this stuff is going to keep coming forward. And we have to get on top of it. We have the details, we know what our organisation's position are, and we're trying our best in Brussels, but the government has to do that the same. But as well as that, this committee is highly valued amongst the business community because it's our only lever in terms of Northern Ireland to get these issues on the awareness of various departments, and we appreciate the constraints of it, but I think Lord Murphy's report is timely, and it emphasises the point that we've been making for quite some time, that more focus and more time is needed to develop these issues.
Yeah. And sorry, just to add to that again, this is only one part of the revision of the EU's animal welfare legislation. We are expecting welfare legislation at time of slaughter to also be revised at some point in the future. Again, that is expected to apply directly in Northern Ireland under the Windsor framework, but then potentially GB as well under the future SPS agreement. And then separately to that as well, the European Commission has also started its revision of the on-farm welfare legislation. Now, we don't know exactly where that is going to sit in the context of Northern Ireland or the future SPS agreement, but we could end up in a situation where we are also dynamically aligned with the EU rules and regulations on that, and that could have far-reaching impacts on Northern Irish agriculture. So I think this is just one part of a much wider topics that I think we'll need to be discussing over the next few months and years.
Well, look, just including Mark from me, Chair, if that's okay, I would just want to say to both of you that if there are issues that you see coming in the future or that are current that affect Northern Ireland, our trade and so forth, especially with regard to this area, we'd want to hear about them at the committee, and you can do that by simply emailing in the clerk and probably copying in the chair, but we want to see these. It's difficult for some of us who are on the committee but are in other areas within the Assembly and maybe aren't across all the details of specific portfolios that aren't our own. I'd want to see those so we can do something about them, and we, just to guarantee we will do our best from our perspective to try and look at them. So just to make that comment. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Just himself as chair, and I know a lot of the members asked lots of questions, so I have one other question, but before that, I'd like to commend yourselves, both the National Farmers Union and the British Agricultural Bureau, for the ongoing work that you have been doing. I think it's quite loud and clear in relation to your written presentations and your presentation today that at this moment in time you feel you need to be better represented. You are doing a lot, and we really, really appreciate the ongoing work that you are doing, because it is an important, if not critical, sector. You have re-emphasised the fact that those whom you are engaging with, it's clear they need to be better resourced. So it's something, obviously, and it has been highlighted through the report as well. We also, in relation to impact assessment and the scale of it, that we're fortunate that some pieces of work have been done on certain aspects, but not all. So it's another key area of work that needs to be done, and particularly around the vets as well. That's another key area regarding, in reality, how can that realistically happen and the huge impact that may have. That's been clearly identified. There's just one other thing, particularly in relation to the transport, the regulation around the transport. Given that it's likely that a transition period of 2 to 5 years may be the case that is agreed, what's your thoughts on that, and what's the sector's thoughts on that?
Maybe I'll start, but as Alexander, please feel free to come in with any additional points afterwards. I think with all of this, we need to be pushing for as long a transition period as possible. A lot of the changes that are currently proposed by the Commission would require significant amendments to the way in which animals are currently transported in Northern Ireland. So whether that's in terms of the vehicles that they're transported in, if they're going to need more space, we're going to have to be buying in new vehicles from other places. Now, the IFIT report that I referred to earlier, I think they said that they would have required 6 new vehicles at a cost of £318,000 each. We would also potentially need new vehicles to transport other species as well. So again, that would come at a huge cost to the sector. In addition to that as well, you can imagine that if these rules come in across the EU, 27 countries, Northern Ireland and the rest of GB, you will have all of these countries who are looking to secure these new vehicles to try and prepare for the introduction of this legislation. Now, you can imagine, particularly with lead-in times, ordering times, are there the trucks and the vehicles needed there to actually do this? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's certainly a question that we do need to ask. So I think, we do need to be pushing for a longer transition period, and one of our strong positions is that the current vehicles that are being used and are in use that people may have recently invested in should be able to be continued to be used until the end of their life. So that's a strong position from us.
No, I think to summarise as well, and again I re-emphasise the point that the farming community is under a lot of pressure right across various policy issues, and this bureaucratic burden that's been placed at their feet, that can't continue on much longer. We're here to provide safe, nutritious food. We understand the principle of reforming the legislation. We're not against that, but this has to be about something that's practical and feasible. And again, we're here to represent the grassroots members' interests, and we will do that at every opportunity.
And is there any other final areas that you want to, as your opportunity to actually say anything on, or do you feel that we've practically been able to cover everything within your written reports? And
so I will say again, I could probably talk about this all day. We could be sat here till 7 p.m. at night if we wanted to sort of talk about all the different elements. But just like to reiterate again that we are in Brussels and we are here representing businesses in Northern Ireland. And if there is any information that you need from us, any questions that you have, we're always available through the UFU office as well to answer those.
On behalf of the committee, we really, really appreciate you taking time out for us. I think it was an excellent evidence session, and I think, particularly for myself, there's a lot of other areas, and it's just great to hear from yourselves the current somewhat fears in relation to the legislation, but you are very keen, and you have been fully engaging with the farming community through NFU, and they're lucky to have yourselves here in the north to be able to advocate on their behalf, and we fully appreciate the work of all farmers across the north, across the island and GB, and thank you very much for today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Very much.
you're more than welcome to grab a wee cup or anything. I'm conscious that we're waiting a while.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Framework Committee.
Item 13. Okay, members, we're just going to move on to item 13, chairperson's business, and I have no chairperson's business, no. Item 14, we're just moving on to any other business. Do members have any other business?
No.
Okay, thank you, members. So, members, just the date and time and place of the next meeting. Members, there has been no notifications received. So I can inform members that the committee has not been notified today in relation to any published DD acts, therefore there will be no meeting of the committee next week. The next meeting has been scheduled for Thursday, the 2nd of October at 10 a.m. in room 30, where the Federation of Small Businesses will present its report on the Windsor framework to the committee. Okay, members, thank you. So the meeting is now adjourned.